Hello.
Hi, Fabian. How are you this morning?
I'm quite well. It's not exactly morning here, but
Oh, that's right.
I guess
It's afternoon, right?
yeah, it's like 2 p.m.
Okay, fantastic. First off, we'd like to welcome you, for calling in to the Tennessee College of Applied Technology in Shelbyville. The president for our organization is here, Miss Laura Monks, and we've got about 65 or so students who are behind us who have given us questions that we've kind of filtered through, so they're not trying to get your exact location.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, and I'm going to do an introduction to you, and if you've got anything to add to this, and I went over to EMSISOFT, of course, Brett Callow was kind enough to hook us up with you, but from EMSISOFT's website, you guys have very brief bios, and it says you're responsible for keeping EMSISOFT ahead of the curve and our users protected. EMSISOFT's resident geek and polar bear lover is how they describe you.
Yeah, that describes me quite well, I guess.
And, we've read a lot of articles from TechCrunch to PC Magazine, and of course, if we just Google your name, you became this ransomware killer or known as a ransomware killer. How do you feel about that?
Honestly, it's more like something that just kind of happened over time. So I don't really have like any strong feelings about it, and I never like woke up one morning and said, "Oh my God, I need to defeat ransomware for everyone." And it's just something that happened gradually. Personally, with the current situation, at least at the moment, I feel pretty good about it. I feel pretty safe where I am right now, so I'm not too concerned. And I actually like my job, and I like the feedback that I get on a daily basis from victims that I manage to help. So it's even though like I kind of got into it by accident, it's still like quite fulfilling job for me.
Well, that's fantastic. One of the things that we read also is you're from East Germany, and the more that you read about the Russian mafia and Russians being involved with a lot of ransomware. Of course, ransomware comes from all over, especially how plentiful it is on the web and you can buy it so cheap. Do you feel that threat, even though you're saying that you feel safe being from East Germany? I know you have to have family back there. I think you've got a niece and a nephew. We read in an article that you try to help out. So will you be able to go back and visit home?
I could probably, but I'm not really a person that likes to travel alone. So my sister and her family, like my niece and also her husband, they're actually going to visit me next week here in London. So that will be quite interesting. And yeah, like now that you mention it, I am from East Germany. That's correct. I come from a town that's called Rostock. And Rostock is actually like one of the biggest harbor city, right, next to the Baltic Sea, right? So there's actually quite a lot of Russian mob activity going on there, to the point that in 2018, I think, the owner of the local shipyard was actually executed in Moscow. And I'm not making that up, because it turned out that like the entire shipyard there was pretty much like a huge money laundering operation for the Russian mob. So I was literally like right next across the street of the Russian mob, which is kind of interesting. And I'm pretty sure if they knew about that, or if they had known about it, then I probably would have gotten like 1 or 2 visits from them.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
Now we're going to get into questions that students have given. Now this is one that Mike Miller, who's my assistant, Beth Byler, and Daryl Graham, they work for our IT team. But we noticed this on, I think it was Krebs on Security, but you give advice to keep files in the cloud as a backup. And are you seeing cloud backups and services being encrypted with ransomware? Like, I think it was a day or 2 ago that QuickBooks, and I believe it was InSync was the other company, that they were battling ransomware even in the cloud.
Yeah. So yes, files in the cloud can also be encrypted. Usually what happens is that your data gets encrypted locally, and then like the backup kind of syncs it up into the cloud, and then like all your cloud backups are encrypted as well. That's why it's always important, and that it's usually, well, I personally always stress this point specifically, is that the cloud solution that you're using needs to support revisioning. That means that you can not only get like the latest version of the files back from the cloud, but also previous versions, exactly because of that. So you can get like the unencrypted versions back if your local copies got encrypted, and you also, and those encrypted files got synced to the cloud.
So I'm sorry.
Yeah, sure.
So with the way that we back up, just at this college, we'll back up every 6 hours to the cloud, and we'll keep those for more than a 30-day period. So we're going to be able to go back to a previous version that was not encrypted, that got backed up within that 6-hour period, is what you're saying.
Yeah, pretty much, yeah.
Okay. And here we go. Do you think that people are out of touch with cyber crimes because there's a disconnect from physical crime on the street? Like if you see physical crime on the street, it is horrific what goes on in the streets sometimes. But when you compare numbers, like we were looking at numbers, that cyber crimes are costing billions or even trillions of dollars more money, but because there's a physical disconnect. Do you see that often? And you know, one of the biggest things is, how do you make people more aware? You know, even though we post on blogs and we have events that are here, you try to tell people how bad cybercrime is, but they always feel like it's not going to affect them.
Yeah, and that is actually true for like both sides, right? When you look at all kinds of crimes, especially things like harassment and mobbing, bullying, and all these kinds of things, since you're not dealing with your victim in person, like the kind of sorry, I'm blanking out because I can't remember the word. That's like the issue that you have sometimes if you don't if you're on a native speaker. Like it's way easier, and people have much less moral quandaries about it, like doing these things to their victims, because they never have to deal with them in person. In general, it's probably going, and as I mentioned before, it's not only a case with ransomware either. Like it affects like pretty much all kinds of crimes. Now, how to educate people about it, I think that's probably going to be quite difficult, because we have been trying to educate people also in all these other areas like bullying and bullying, defamation, and all these kinds of things for years now. It's probably something that it will probably kind of solve itself, right. Since people get more and more people kind of grow up with the internet nowadays, right? That means they will be way more aware about what is going on in all these areas. But at the moment, we very much are trying to catch up to, since like, I mean, our the digital world and like the internet, it develops like way faster than our real world is, right? You just need to take a look at like lawmakers and how slowly like the government reacts to like new developments and new issues that arise from everyone going digital and everyone being connected through the internet. So the more people grow up with using the internet, and the more people get familiar with the internet and like know their way around the internet, the better it probably will get. The better it will get over time.
Right.
But yeah. So I do believe like that, since there's this disconnect, you're never going to interact with the victim directly. People are it's way easier for people to just go to the dark side and like infect people with malware or ransomware or harass people and all these kinds of things. So.
Right, and that makes sense. Over a period of time, as we develop with technology and people are growing up with it, they're going to become more aware of those crimes, and absolutely, and we agree with you. Now here's a new term that we're seeing, and really it's not a new term because it goes back in time, but invisible malware that lies dormant in memory and it's fileless. And we know that a majority of antivirus or anti-malware solutions scan memory for those anomalies, and it will find it. I guess our question is that more hype because we're seeing it more, we're seeing it more in the news about invisible malware and you're never going to be able to detect it. So is that more hype, or is that true that we're seeing more complex malware that's becoming memory resident, and then it becomes polymorphic and perhaps becomes ransomware malware?
Honestly, I really don't like the term fileless malware to begin with, because that malware usually isn't really fileless. There still is like some sort of infection vector, which usually is still some sort of like Office document and stuff. And last time I checked, like an Office document is still a file, right? What that term usually refers to, this type of malware usually still want to achieve persistence, right? So still want to keep control over the system even after the system rebooted. And usually what this type of malware does is, instead of storing the code that is being executed in like a file on the system, it stores it inside places like the registry, for example. Right. And it's very easy to scan the registry. Like pretty much every single antivirus out there does it, right? So detection-wise, it's not that difficult. It is true that these types of attacks happen more and more often, and they also get more and more complex. That is absolutely true. However, I just don't really like the term fileless malware, mostly because like it's not really fileless. There's still like plenty of artifacts lying around that you can look for. It's not really invisible either. There are almost always still some sort of files involved, and you still have to open files and everything to get like the entire chain of infection starting. So yeah, it's like often when it comes to IT security, there's often like a little bit of hype involved, right? Trying to get press and like drum up press. And when you say, oh yeah, there's like this new script malware that stores its script inside the registry, but we can still detect it very easily because we have always scanned the registry anyway, that becomes like way less of a headline and telling people about fileless malware, and it's invisible because we all know that antivirus only scans file, but there's no file. And yeah, it's like you always have to take these kinds of headlines and these stories with like a little bit of grain of salt, because often these stories are like written by marketing people and they try to hype up one product or another. And especially if that article closes with something like, yeah, and by the way, our product is the only one that detects it, right. Then you know that you just had like some marketing piece that you just run, and it has most likely nothing to do with the real world out there.
Okay, fantastic. Now, I've got a student here, and I'm going to let you introduce, he's going to introduce himself, give you his name, and he's going to ask a question. He's actually going to ask two questions.
Yeah, sure.
Nice to meet you, by the way, and it's a pleasure speaking with you. My name is Berto Moreno.
Yeah, nice to meet you.
Oh, nice to meet you too. My first question of the two is, can you expand your thought from our initial interview on why at times it would be more beneficial to pay ransoms, specifically for data recovery companies, and even not to be ashamed of it?
I mean, you always, when it comes to paying ransoms, there's always like, especially when you got hit as a company, you often have to just weigh out, yeah, am I going to pay the ransom or am I going to shut down my business, right? So, and especially when you get confronted with a decision like that, then paying the ransom is obviously most likely the right thing to do, even though it may not be the most ethical thing to do. And of course, you can always say, no, we must never pay ransoms because we are going to just finance the next attack wave and the next company will get hit. That's like a position that most people only have if they are not the one who are the victim of this to begin with, and whose business is going to close down if they don't pay the ransom. So that's why I say that it's okay if like a data recovery company pays a ransom to get the data back if there's like no other option. But the problem, or what we are seeing at the moment, especially from like a couple of quite scrupulous companies, is that they don't even try to get the data back without paying the ransom, and more importantly is that they pretend they are not paying the ransom and try to pretty much like almost scam their clients by pretending that they were the ones who decrypted the data and like no ransom money exchanged hands in any way, shape or form. And this becomes very apparent. I mean, there are a couple of companies that are known to do this. And when you go through like the testimonials and the reviews that like previous clients left there, and you can see like, yeah, I contacted like every single other company before, and all they told me is that they couldn't restore my files without paying the ransom, but this company was able to. And you just think to yourself, and wow, what's going on? Like, clearly the client had no idea that they just paid the ransom, and probably like a hefty amount extra, just for these shysters to go around like get some bitcoins and pay the ransomware authors off, which is, yeah. So it's always, as I mentioned before, it's like always difficult to kind of put yourself in the shoes of a victim if you never have been in a situation like that yourself. So arguing you shouldn't pay is kind of difficult if you never were like a victim of a ransomware attack before.
Fabian, this is Steve again, and Bert's going to ask another question. But what would you say is the decryption? What am I looking for? The percentage of ransomware that you or your organization is able to decrypt?
There are actually like different levels of how we can help. Now, the amount of ransomware out there that can be decrypted with like perfectly, so that they don't have to pay anything at all, so that the victim doesn't have to pay anything at all, is probably around like 10 to 15%. Now, there are other cases where if we get the ransomware author to do something, get us it. For example, we recently had a case where like a big MSP got hacked, and their remote monitoring management system was abused to deploy ransomware to like, I think it was like over 2,000 different clients of theirs. And like everything was encrypted.
Oh, wow.
Now, we couldn't get them the files back like entirely for free, but we found an issue inside the ransomware, so that if we could get the ransomware author to give us like one decryptor for one system, we could use the information we gathered from that one decryptor to create decryptors that would work on all the other systems as well. So in that particular case, for example, we managed to get the ransom down from, I think it was like 700 or 800,000 US dollars to about 10 to 15. So that's still a win in our book, right? But there was still like a little bit of money that exchanged hands there. So it's not like perfect in any way, shape or form. Right. So they're like kind of different levels to it. So full decryption, I would say about like in 10 to 15% of all ransomware families. Now you have to keep in mind, like especially secure ransomware, if like one ransomware family turned out to be secure, like it was the case for GANCrab for a long time, then like that ransomware is the one thing that like everyone pushes, right? So there's a difference between the percentage of ransomware families and the percentage of ransomware victims, because usually the secure ransomware will be responsible for way more victims, because like all the different affiliates and like bot herders and God knows what, because there's this huge additional ecosystem around ransomware and ransomware as a service. Kind of flocks to the secure ones, and they will get way more people infected. Like, yeah, like the more insecure ones that people only created for their own purposes, and that they are often like home written and stuff. So,
okay, fantastic. Bert's got another question, and then we've got several after that. But we won't keep you for the full hour, I don't think. But Bert, go ahead.
Have you seen moments where you believe that a competitor or even a disgruntled former employee has used ransomware as an espionage?
I'm not aware of one. There are some interesting coincidences though. So we are dealing a lot with like ransomware victims, and we are also dealing with like a lot of like data recovery companies and like cyber insurances and stuff. So if certain data recovery companies get contacted first by a victim for like an initial assessment, and then that client decides to go with a different data recovery company because, for example, their cyber insurance has like a contract with a certain company and they make you go through them, and you tell the first company that you contacted about it, then for some reason suddenly the data recovery chances go way down, even for ransomware families that we know usually have like reliable decryptors. So what is happening there most likely is you have to keep in mind that, especially when it comes to ransomware, there's, as I mentioned before, especially in the last year or so, there have been like these additional auxiliary businesses pretty much that revolve around ransomware. You have like these data recovery companies that specialize in ransomware and ransom negotiation, for example. You have all these cyber insurances and stuff like that. So there's like a lot of money that exchanges hands between cyber insurances and these data recovery companies, and these data recovery companies very much want to get the contracts from the insurances, right? So if a data recovery company can pay off a ransomware author to kind of sabotage or the ransom negotiations for a client that they know is using a competing service, then the insurance that pretty much has to pay the claim will have to pay the claim will probably no longer work with like the company that botched the case, so to say. So there's like a lot of shady stuff going on in that regard. There also have been cases, where employees that were fired left behind backdoors and all kinds of other things. So I can imagine that it's probably happened, but I don't know like a case for sure. At least not from the top of my head right now.
Okay, fantastic. This is going to come from our IT team, this next question, or it's a comment with a question. You retweeted Sarah White of EMSISOFT, and I hope it was her that said this, never detail the flaws of an active ransomware campaign publicly because cyber criminals will take advantage of you telling them what their mistake is. And our question is, when do you decide that you're going to give that information out to the public? If it's active and you're seeing it flow, but you guys have got a decryptor, do you guys hold a lot of how you did that behind the scenes so that you won't see a variant come out? And when do you decide to sometimes give that code out?
In general, we never give out the codes of our decryptors. We just don't do it. Now, it actually has happened before. like there was one incident with crypto defense where Symantec so just to give you a little bit of backstory, like crypto defense was the original name of the ransomware that later became Crypto Wall, and I'm pretty sure if you ever dealt with ransomware, then Crypto Wall should be like a name that you're familiar with, because it's like one of the most prolific ransomware campaigns out there. It ceased to exist now, but yeah, it still happens. So they kind of copied the encryption code directly from the Microsoft documentation, and they overlooked a little detail in the documentation that said, oh, and yeah, if you don't set a certain flag when you create your like your private and public key pair using these APIs, then the key will be saved on the system. And they didn't have that flag set. So every single victim still had like all the encryption keys on their system. So you could just use those to decrypt all the files. And that's essentially what our decryptor did. Now, Symantec also saw that, and they created like a blog post, and then they used their PR and media contacts to push it out there and tell everyone, look at those stupid ransomware authors, they made such a stupid mistake. And it literally took like 24 hours for the crypto defense authors to fix the mistake and push out a completely new version that was secure, and then they went through the entire rebrand and rebranded as Crypto Wall.
Gotcha.
So that is like a very, very real threat, and we have like first-hand experience pretty much what it is like to have like a company ruin like the pretty much like the kind of ruin your campaign to help victims. So as to when we decide to publish them, so we usually have like usually we wait for at least 6 months to a year so if we haven't seen a ransomware for like 6 months to a year, then we will probably talk about it if people ask us about it.
Right.
We will also talk about flaws once the ransomware authors themselves found it and fixed it. So pretty much anything that was fixed is open game, and we will talk openly about it. Or if the ransomware pretty much ceased to operate for more than half a year to a year, then we will talk about it as well.
Okay. I'm going to let this next student introduce himself, and he's got 1 or 2 questions.
Good morning, sir. It's certainly a pleasure to speak with you. My name is Joshua Tam. I have a couple of questions for you. So,
Sure.
So you say it is good later to learn Python, C, and assembly to help with malware analysis. What are the primary programming languages used with the majority of ransomware, and what do you use to decompile that?
So it's almost certainly C and C++, followed by Delphi. I have no idea why, to be honest, but yeah, Delphi is quite popular. And then you also have like a couple of occasionally you have a couple of ransomware families that are written in assembly, and you have a couple who are like written in Go or Rust, or like we even had like a ransomware family that was written in Node.js for whatever reason. So it was quite interesting because it literally was like a 32 megabyte file. It was like an Electron app, and yeah, it was horrible. Anyway. So yeah, C and C++ is probably like the most common one, followed by Delphi. As to what I personally use to reverse engineer these things, so I kind of grew up with assembly, so I don't use a decompiler per se that often. I mean, it certainly helps speed things up, but in my experience, a lot of decompilers often produce like very inaccurate. Wow, I'm sorry. Inaccurate. It's a hard word. I'm sorry. Inaccurate outputs. So obviously the kind of leader in the field is probably either pro, but it's quite expensive, so it may not be available to you. They unfortunately don't really offer student licenses either, which in my opinion is like a huge disadvantage, especially for them. But there's also Ghidra, which is really nice actually, and it's quite powerful. It's unfortunately written in Java. That means it's like really, really slow and like eats memory even worse than Chrome does. But it works quite well. I personally use IDA Pro as well as Ghidra and as like a debugger, and to just look at what the malware is doing in real time. And for like debugging, essentially, I use x64 debug, which is quite nice. So yeah.
Okay, fantastic.
So, if you're not under an NDA, what is the largest attack you've mitigated or fixed, and what are the number of files and the time it took you to find a key to decrypt that?
So the largest case, let me think about it. I think the problem here is that, especially when it comes to how do you define the largest, right? Like the biggest ransom, because especially in the last year, like the ransom demands exploded. So even a comparatively small attack nowadays often asks for like six-figure ransoms, right? So I think like the MSP that we were dealing with, I think they had like 2,400 systems encrypted. That was probably the largest, and I think the ransom amount was like kind of in the 700 to 800,000 US dollars. Finding the flaw actually took us about 10 minutes.
Oh wow!
So, but that's often the case. Like people, often ransomware authors, like they repeat the same mistakes over and over again. So once you know kind of what you have to look for, and what like a secure implementation would look like and what an insecure implementation would look like, it's quite easy to spot them. And especially for ransomware that is used in targeted attacks and hacks where people connect via RDP, you usually don't have to deal with things like obfuscators or like virtual machine-based obfuscators and all these kinds of things that would greatly slow down analysis. So yeah, in that particular case, it took about 10 minutes.
So are you seeing there's a more focus where they're trying to get government and huge organizations and higher education institutions like colleges, the people that have the money, are you seeing an increase in that versus the ransomware that's going to go out to a home user?
So there definitely has, like, ransomware for home users has been on a decline and has been for like quite a long time. In my opinion, the biggest reason for that is that nowadays most people use smartphones and they have like all the important data that is personal to them, like pictures and like memories, videos of their children growing up and stuff like that on their smartphone. And most smartphones automatically back up to the cloud anyway, like Google Cloud or iCloud or whatever, right? So even if you get these people infected, so they can just re-download the stuff and they will just move on. Now, for companies and especially governments and all these kinds of things, those are like the real juicy targets. What we have seen is, especially when it comes to certain botnets like Emotet or TrickBot, that they will actually try to detect whether or not they manage to infiltrate a company network. And if that's the case and like the target looks juicy and has like a lot of important looking data on it, then they will actually deploy ransomware. Otherwise, they will just use the system as part of their botnet and sending out spam and whatever, or maybe they deploy a lot like a cryptocurrency miner or something like that. So yeah, definitely. So companies are the prime target at this point. And I think the biggest reason for that is that a lot of, like, in my opinion at least, like cyber insurance is probably the biggest reason here. Right. Because you have to keep in mind, cyber insurance has like two aspects to it, right? First of all, obviously they would pay the ransom in case you get ransom. The other thing is that they would also cover the loss of revenue during the time where you have to recover backups. Because like when you look through these policies, they all have this, oh yeah, you need to have like backups and all this kinds of stuff. And you would think, okay, if I pay cyber insurance and they make me do backups, then why do I need cyber insurance? Because I can just like recover my backups again, right?
Now,
Makes no sense.
Now, would you recommend cyber insurance for organizations?
Personally, I probably would, even though I'm not like the biggest fan of cyber insurance, but
Right.
in the end, since they would still cover like the loss of revenue, yeah, and they often not only cover like ransomware attacks, but like hacking in general and like data leaks and all this kind of stuff. So it probably makes sense. And I think in a lot of those cases where you hear, oh yeah, like for example, the Florida cities that got ransomed a couple of weeks ago, right? Where like 400,000 US dollars got paid. What people don't know that wasn't like the taxpayer who was paying that, it was the cyber insurance of the city who paid it. Like the city itself, they only had like a co-payment of like 10,000. So yeah, it's certainly helpful if you reach like a certain like a certain size as a company to have cyber insurance, not only for the ransomware protection, but like in general.
All right, Josh has got, I think he's got two more things, but he's just going to finish this, then we're going to go to another question. We'll come back to him, but go ahead, Josh.
So on your personal GitHub, you have a host of tools and reading for malware analysis. Is there anything else that you could recommend for a young or new security analyst?
For a young security analyst, honestly, the best advice I can give you if you want to get started in that business, just do it. And I know it sounds kind of cheesy and like kind of stupid, but in the end, you can read through so many books, through so many courses. In the end, you only get better by just doing it. So just sign up for like VirusShare or go to the Zoo repository on GitHub that has like a whole bunch of malware samples online, and just download it and try to dissect it and figure out what it's doing. And after that, go and look up for blog posts that also looked into the ransomware and like compare notes. Like what did you, or that also looked into the sample and compare notes. Like maybe they found something that you overlooked, and then try to figure out why did you overlook it? Like what did they do differently to you? And maybe you found stuff that they overlooked, and then you can be proud of yourself because obviously you're already better than like a professional blog poster, right? So that's like the biggest advice I can give you. Just do it.
And Fabian, let me do a little, maybe I'm a little late doing this, but an introduction.
Yeah, sure.
An introduction to our school. We're kind of a non-traditional college. We're vocational education. When students come here, they're with me 30 hours a week. I literally see them more than I see my own wife and children. So basically, we have 2 hours of lecture, 2 hours of hands-on, and then they have 2 hours of projects. The students at our organization actually do live projects with Homeland Security. They do vulnerability tests against the live. They're not doing just labs on simulators. They do live vulnerability, live pen tests to live targets that we have permission to do that on. And then they have to write capstones. So they'll spend about 2,100 hours with me, which, you know, is going to be well over a year. So, you know, again, I want to thank you for coming in and, you know, talking to us. We're not done by any means. We're almost done, but that's kind of an introduction to what we do. So we're always reaching out to people like from Brett to an advisory committee to make sure that we stay on target. And that's not me trying to justify what we're doing, but in the world, these guys always, they're more inquisitive about security because they see it, because that generation of people that you talked about that are growing up with technology, we're beginning to see it at this facility from year to year. And but again, we want to thank you. But that's kind of an introduction to, it's not a traditional college where you have your gen ed studies where you go to English and then you go to history, and then you only get an hour or two of computer science. Basically, these guys are getting 6 hours a day, 5 days a week, and they're with us for over a year. But that's what.
Yeah, that sounds great. I mean, personally, I'm also from like a very untraditional background. I mean, I don't even have a school degree, so.
Right.
So yeah, what I was going to say is just like don't get too much focus on like what you should read and what you should use. It very much comes down to practice, and of course having like some structure to it, like in your school, for example, it certainly makes sense, and it will probably accelerate your progress. But in the end, like learning reverse engineering and like learning security and malware analysis ultimately always comes down to a grind, right? You have to put in the hours, you just have to do it, so.
Okay. This comes from our IT team. Do you have a favorite Linux distro?
Actually, I am like an avid Gentoo user.
Okay. Fantastic.
So.
And here's another question real quick. Are cyber criminals getting more focused on how to break into virtual computers and VMs with larger companies?
Yes, they do. And it has been like a gradual shift, to be honest. Like 10 years ago, it was very, very common for malware to check if it's working or if it's running inside like a virtualized environment. And if it is, to just bail out because they just assumed that they were being run in some sort of sandbox and there was like a malware analyst sitting in front of it and looking what it's doing and stuff. And nowadays, like almost no malware does these kinds of checks because since the industry very much shifted to virtualizing everything and putting everything into containers or like virtual machines and everything, those are actually like the most profitable targets for them. So excluding all of them just to prevent a couple of malware researchers from running your stuff inside a sandbox, which never really worked to begin with because, yeah, you can just patch out those checks, right? Certainly makes sense for them. And there have been quite a lot of ransomware families that specifically target virtual machine images, and that will even stop virtual machines that are currently running so that the disk images can be properly encrypted and stuff like that. So that's certainly something that's happening.
Okay, fantastic. This next question is from Leo. Leo's a little Skype shy, so he asked me if I would say this, but you were interviewed at one time, and it's referring to cyber criminals who were mad at you for the publicity. Every time you got quoted, they would just get angrier. And you said, I was shocked, but also felt a real sense of pride. And you went on to say, it's clear that the coder is really mad at you. They've taken the time and effort to write a message knowing that I'll probably see it and I'm clearly getting under their skin. And of course, they've included your name inside of the code. And some of the cyber criminals even gave you credit for what you were doing, and they were hoping you would get in. But Leo says, with all this animosity that builds, and especially living near that Soviet bloc or Russia, do you ever have a sense of paranoia when you travel to a pub or a service station or when you go shopping?
I do. Yeah, not so much now, since I do live in the UK now, right, which is like a little bit further away. But yeah, especially when I was still living in like East Germany, that was certainly something that I was concerned about. You also kind of have to keep in mind certain quirks of like the way Germany works, which most people probably aren't aware of, but Germany has like a central register. That means when you move, or when you move to Germany, you actually have to register with like your local municipality. And also, if you like move within Germany, you have to keep your address current, and you're required by law to do this. And you can actually go to the local municipality and just give them a couple of data, and if they are able if they put it into their system and like you are the only match left, they will actually hand out your address. So you can literally just go and figure everyone's address out by just going to the local municipality, give them like the name of the person and the birth date, and then you have their address and you can go visit them. So that's most certainly like something that makes you very, very paranoid. And I had moments when like the doorbell went off and I wasn't expecting anyone, that I got like really paranoid out of the sudden, but not so much now in the UK, since they don't have that nice central register, which is, yeah. And I think you guys don't have one either, right?
Right, we can kind of just move away. And
yeah, pretty much.
By the way, if you're a teacher, a student can find you. If the CIA came and got me and hid me, a student can find me. I just want you to know that students can do that. Here's a question from Bradley, so I'm going to let him do a little intro to himself.
Hi,
Sure.
I'm Bradley. Thank you for taking time to speak with us this morning. My question to you is, how do you continue to do your job or stay motivated with the pressure and difficulties you face with people opposing you?
I ask myself that sometimes, to be honest. It's probably like the tons of positive feedback I get on almost a daily basis, right? Like people just encouraging me, or writing me letters that I helped save their business, or that they still are thankful that I got their files back. There's this one photographer from the UK, for example, that even years after I managed to get like all his files back, he still contacts me every couple of months and telling me about his daughter, for example, who wants to go into cryptography now and do what I do, and that's obviously quite motivating, right? But yeah, it can be stressful, and I most certainly have like really bad days every now and then, but for the most part, positive feedback helps quite a bit with motivation.
Well, please stay motivated, because you're actually changing lives out there, and these students who are going through IT right now. So, keep your chin up. You're doing a great job. We've only got about 2 more questions here, and this comes from our IT team. With e-commerce and the trillions of dollars that are now digital, there's no going back to just a monetary system where we're exchanging cash or as much. It's just going all digital. And everyone's life has changed. Will we ever be safe as far as cybersecurity? Or is it always going to be a cat and mouse game?
I mean, we were never really safe with like hard cash either, right? So I don't think you will ever be safe. At least as long as we are still free to some extent, we will never be safe, because freedom always comes with certain risks attached, right? So it's always this balancing act between like keeping people safe and maintaining their freedom. And you always will have to make compromises, and whenever you have to make compromises, you always risk that something bad could happen. So we probably will never be safe. We will probably be safer, and in my opinion at least, we already are safer compared to like traditional crimes, so to say, or like compared to like the cash-only world already. So yeah.
These are just, we're gonna close in just a second. Josh has got 2 little things, and the class has been wondering this, of course. But Josh, if you would. So
why the obsession with polar bears?
That's actually, I don't know. Well, I do know. So essentially, my best friend got like a polar bear onesie for her birthday. So she constantly like ran around in her polar bear onesie pretty much, and it was actually kind of cute. So as a joke, like everybody like called her little polar bear, and it kind of developed from there pretty much.
Okay.
So,
last question, and we again thank you for your time. But go ahead.
So I saw online that you're currently running a Ryzen 7 second generation build with that Vega card in it. Are there any sort of PC games that you typically play, or?
I actually no longer run that system because it died, unfortunately. It wasn't the fault of the Ryzen though. But yeah, there are a couple of games I play. I'm a quite avid World of Warcraft player. To the point where actually, I'm not sure if like any one of you is like familiar with World of Warcraft, but it's pretty much like a kind of RPG style game, massively multiplayer, and like the main focus of the game is like go into dungeons and defeat like really big monsters. And I actually played in like a very good guilds, like world top 5 level guild for a while. So yeah, I play that quite a bit. Other than that, it's mostly massively multi-player. Pretty much like Desert Online, Guild Wars 2, World of Warcraft, these types of games. I'm not like that much into shooters, to be honest. I find them kind of boring. So yeah.
Well, Fabian, we want to thank you for your time and the education that you gave our students today. And of course, we're going to put this audio up. And you know, you don't understand the impact you've made. Just Google yourself, and you'll see the people who are thankful for the things that you've done. You know, but you're making a great impact, and we appreciate you and EMSISOFT and Brett Callow.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me.
Okay, well, you know, be safe, and hopefully we'll talk soon. Okay.
Okay. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.